Are you looking for a story that combines a compelling plot, immersive world building, and in depth character development to create a world you want to jump into and explore yourself? Well, if so, this isn't the series for you.
I know that sounds bad.
This might not be the next One Piece or Attack on Titan you read, but if you like video games, level up, MMO power fantasy stories that you can just turn your brain off to, then this is the perfect series for you. Without further ado, I introduce you to Reincarnation of the Strongest Sword God. The main character, Shi Fang, lives in a world where the full dive game, God's Domain, has practically become a second world. Not only can the money you make in the game be converted to real money, but you can also play the game while you sleep. Also add on the fact that 1 hour in real life is 2 hours in the game. This series is a gamer's paradise. Because of the money-making opportunities, many companies have invested in creating guilds in the game, with the hope of their guild becoming powerful and returning their investment tenfold. And for the guilds that stand at the top of God's Domain, they can earn the equivalent of hundreds of millions of dollars. Shortly before the release of God's Domain, Shi Fang joined a guild called Shadow that for the next 10 years he put blood, sweat, and tears into in order to improve the guild. He even worked his way up to the position of guild leader. But in the end, all his hard work amounted to him getting fired from his position by the company that owned Shadow. But not having a guild wasn't the biggest problem he had. When he joined Shadow, he signed a contract that his character belonged to them. So upon being fired, he also had to delete the character he put 10 years into. It was at this point that one day, upon waking up, he found himself in the past, 10 years earlier, a few days before the launch of God's Domain. I don't think I even have to tell you what he decided to do next, but I'll humor you a little. He decided to take all the experience he had and all the tricks he had learned and make his own guild. So what this story is about is Shi Fang's rise to power in God's Domain. When my friend recommended this story to me, I looked at the title, read the synopsis, and thought it seemed very basic. I almost didn't give it a chance, but I'm glad I did, because I quickly found out there are a lot of things that make this story unique. For example, your physical state in real life allows you to have a better synchronization with your character in the game, which in turn allows you to improve your battle skills in the game. Many people neglect staying healthy and working out because they think that that time could be spent improving their techniques in the game. Well, no matter how hard these people train in the game, they eventually hit a wall because their physical state doesn't allow them to synchronize well with their character. Talking about physical ability leads me to talking about how many experts in God's Domain learn real martial arts to fight better in the game. The story takes this concept and builds on it in a cool way. Because you're more agile in the game than in real life, there are certain martial arts techniques that are only possible in the game. Another thing I like is how God's Domain goes about the rarity of items and quests. The rarity tiers are as follows: Trash, Common, Bronze, Mysterious Iron, Secret Silver, Fine Gold, Dark Gold, Epic, Fragmented Legendary, Legendary, Fragmented Divine, and lastly, Divine. So what I like about these rankings is that the average player wears equipment in the Bronze to Fine Gold range. Very rarely would a player be able to obtain a Dark Gold item that is the same level as them. So when you're reading the story and a character obtains something epic ranking up, it gets you really excited because you know the item is going to be insane. As of recording, I'm on chapter 604, and the highest rarity item someone has obtained is Fragmented Legendary. For even more context, the Divine rarity was seen as a myth by players even 10 years after the game's release. So that's for equipment. Quests also follow this ranking system. The classifications for quests have too many pieces to get into in this video, but for general explanation, you have your general quests and then epic and legendary quests. General quests, as I'm defining them, are quests that every player can do at least once, and many are repeatable. Overall, there aren't many general quests, so players mainly level up by grinding monsters. For epic and legendary quests, these are unique quests that only one player will ever be able to do. That should give you a picture of how rare these quests are, but for further explanation, an epic quest is roughly as rare as a fragmented legendary item. So these quests are almost never seen. Also with quests, the higher the rarity, the harder it is to complete the quest. But also you'll get better loot as well. This goes hand in hand with God's Domain's risk versus reward rule, where the more risk you take, the more rewards you can get. For epic and legendary quests, they're even more risky because if you fail them, they will actually penalize you. If you haven't got the picture by now, God's Domain is a very hardcore game where nothing will come easy. Players that stick out are 1 in a million, and they only stick out by either getting lucky and getting a good item or a rare quest, or being extremely skilled. Beyond this, God's Domain is difficult for another reason. If you die, you will lose an entire level and a little bit of the gear you're wearing. If you are someone who kills other players, the more players you kill, the more levels you lose, and the more gear you will drop upon death. Schmoove into a new topic. As I've been reading, I've noticed this is a very grindable series. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm on chapter 604, and that's out of just under 3,000 chapters, and it is a completed series. So if you end up liking the series, you have a lot of content. The craziest thing to me is that I'm this far into the series, and the characters are just starting to hit level 30, and the max level is 200. Despite leveling slowly, it hasn't even felt slow. Instead, the series somehow feels like it's moving at a fast pace, which is something I like about it. Alright, now I'm going to pass it over to Butter with the pros and cons list.
Thank you, Butter. So, starting with the pros, we have good pacing. As I just mentioned, the series moves very fast, and so you don't have to worry about any slow parts or anything like that. Different parts of the game. So, another cool thing is that around the world of God's domain, there's a ton of different regions in different parts of the game that are almost like completely different games. Like one I found that I've been to or in the series so far, they have like shelters that they have to upgrade by killing monsters, and then the further they upgrade the shelter, there's the more gear they can get from the shelter by turning in these like soul crystal things. Another thing, main character learns and is not the strongest, so he he continues to learn through the series, and he actually gets stronger and stronger. So it is a power fantasy where he tends to beat everyone, and he's even like hailed as like the number one expert in his like kingdom or whatever. There's a lot of kingdoms and empires in God's domain, so it's not saying a ton, but it's still a pretty big thing because there's millions and millions of players in the kingdom. But there's like we continuing to learn about different realms of like martial arts and stuff that he has to learn to be able to be stronger. And there's actually someone he's fought, or maybe a few people he's fought, and I know there's an area they're about to go to where I'm positive there's people that they're going to fight, that all these people are stronger than him. So, all right, moving on to reincarnation isn't forgotten. So, the fact that he's been reincarnated isn't forgotten. The author doesn't stop using that as an aspect. He continues to use his knowledge of the future of the game to his advantage to make his plans. So, that's another cool thing. So, good scope of where players are at. So, the author does a really good job of showing us where the other players in the game are at, like what level they are, what equipment they have, what the majority of players, what elite players, what like the top pro players are, what guild leaders are at. We have a really good idea throughout the series what like kind of power level they're at, and the author kind of always mentions that. So it gives you a little better scope of the series, which I like. Alrighty, so the real world is relevant. So every once in a while, they'll bounce back to the real world to show some things that are happening there. The vast majority of the series takes place in the game, but every once in a while you get a few chapters where sometimes he has to fight people in real life in like fighting tournaments or stuff because he is a really good martial artist. Or there's like certain training facility things or outside of the game guild things that he has to establish that they'll show in the real world. God's domain evolves. So the game continually evolves when the players reach a certain point. So where I'm at, there's been 3 evolutions, but I looked in the wiki and I think there's like a total of 7 or something. But each evolution changes how the game works. The most important one is like the second one from where I'm at. And the second evolution made it so instead of saying like the names of the skills they were doing to do them, they actually have to do the action for the skills. And how well they do the action determines how effective that skill is. So 85%, if they do the skill 85% correctly, they'll do 100% of what it used to be when they had just had to say it. But anything above that, they do significantly more damage to the point where if you do 100% of the ability, you'll do 220% damage than the skill would have done at 85%, which was the normal. The third evolution, for example, adds like a gravity. So different places you go to might have like a higher gravity. So at one point, the main character was going somewhere, and like the higher he ascended up the mountain, the gravity kept increasing. So as you went up the mountain, it became harder to fight. Or some places might have less gravity. And then there's some places where you can change the gravity to help you train. So that's kind of a cool thing. And then if you're wondering about the first evolution, it was just like it made it so that you can actually attack teammates. So you just have to like watch out about that. So it's kind of like a smaller one. New aspects of the game become relevant. So as they level, they unlock certain like things in the game. So the one where I'm at right now that they're kind of getting to unlocking is mounts. So once you hit level 40, you can get a mount. So this was never mentioned beforehand, but all of a sudden he got a mount, a really good mount, the main character, and the author starts telling us about mounts and how they're important later on because to get to the higher level like enemy areas, they have to go way further. So the mounts become more and more important. So the better mount a guild like guilds have, the faster they can get to those spots, the faster they can get back to the city. So it makes their whole leveling faster, makes how much money they get from leveling faster. It's like really important. So they're showing that. And that's just one aspect. There's like countless aspects. Like at some point they've mentioned it already, but I know they'll get into it later. The guilds can actually build their own city. So right now there's established cities, but at some point the guilds will actually build their own cities. So that's something I think cool. You keep getting kind of surprised by new things in the game. All right, so another one, God's domain is well thought out. So the author has done a very good job of like thinking out how the game is going to work, how different aspects of the game work, how it all coincides with each other. It's kind of like if game developers wanted to take this game and they had the time,
they could actually make all this stuff into a game just off of what the story says. All right, so our next sheet of pros, we have impending doom. There are things the main character doesn't know. So, despite him being reincarnated and he has 10 years experience as a guild leader and he knows a ton of stuff about the game, there's certain features that weren't even available to him in his last life that he's finding out about now because he has a higher status in this life from being like way up in the kind of the food chain, the rankings, you know. All right, so next there's monsters the main character can't beat. So, like I said, there are players that are stronger than him. There's also a ton of monsters that are stronger than him, or NPCs that are stronger than him. So there's a lot of monsters where he'll try to steal stuff from, like items that are guardian, and that's happened like probably 3 or 4 times at this point. But he like doesn't even try to fight them because he know he would just get destroyed. Like he has no shot at all. So lastly, we have main character badass moments. So this is something I love. He has so many badass moments that you're like, oh, this is sick. Like he'll like just kill like 100 players and he'll destroy them each with one hit. So it's like insane. Or he uses like his brain. Like he's actually really smart too, and he's really like good. He's a really good strategist. So he'll use his like strategy skills to destroy enemies that are like their group of enemies is stronger than his group of allies, and he'll like beat them just through his knowledge of the game and knowledge of battle in general. So that's really cool. Moving on to the cons, we have the main character never loses. So this is one thing that kind of annoys me. He like never dies. Like you never have to worry about him dying. So it kind of like no matter what situation the situation is described, no matter how bad it is, you're like he's gonna get out of it. He's gonna find a way out. Next is the author forgets things. So this doesn't happen too much, but there are certain aspects of the game he's forgotten. So like right off the bat, there's this thing that he started collecting beforehand because he knew that it was an item that he knew was going to be more expensive in the future. So he was buying it now so he could resell it later. And it was these things called card sets. And apparently once like players defeated a certain dungeon, an NPC was going to appear who they could trade the card sets to for like skills. But that never happened. So I think there's like a few other things like that, but that's the most major one. So it's not like an insanely bad thing, but it is like you're like, okay, what happened to this? I want to know what happened, right? So for side characters being forgotten, so this kind of ties into the last point. The side characters that kind of get like written off or you just don't see anymore, or like as I wrote forgotten, they kind of make sense sometimes. Like they're players that he got at the beginning, like he used to like help him with battles or whatever, and they weren't like weak people, but they weren't too strong, so they didn't really like line up with the upper echelon of the later like fighting force of like their main fighting force. So there's no really reason for the story to show them anymore. But there's like his best friend right off the bat. He kind of like he's mentioned like here and there now, but he's just like you like almost never hear of him, and it's just like okay, I want to see more of him, you know. So for the next thing, repetitive fights. So the series is so long that the fights like eventually get kind of repetitive. Of like like everyone thinks the main character is gonna lose. He pulls out something and he wins, and then he just wins, or he just wins super easily, or everyone underestimates him and then he's fine. So it gets a little repetitive, but there are some fights where I'm like, oh, I didn't expect that, or it's cool how he thinks through winning a fight sometimes. So that's another interesting thing. All right, so for the next page, we have too many stats. So sometimes the author just like overloads you with stats, which I thought was really cool at first, and maybe this also could be a pro to some people. But anytime there's a new item, it doesn't have to be that good of an item. The author will have like a full list of stats for like strength, agility it gives you, how much damage it does, the skills it has, and a lot of them are like it's cool. You got this good thing, but we never see it again. Like he gives it to someone else or sells it to someone. So it's just like at some point, it's just oh, okay, another stat. So next we have the story's too focused on the main character. What I mean by this is it's always shown the series is always from the characters, like it's following the main character. It's not necessarily from his perspective, like it's third person's perspective, but it never goes to other people in the world and is like, all right, here's what they're doing right now. Here's what this group is doing right now. Here's what they're planning. Like every once in a while it might happen, but it's not nearly as much where you have a good idea of what's happening. So that is one thing I wish was better. And that kind of seems like it's getting a little better, but that is one thing that could definitely be improved. So for the next one, we have women are portrayed poorly. So I know in anime manga, it's kind of typical for like women not to be like realistic people, and they're like that's kind of what the author wrote them to do. And it's never been like so bad that I've had an issue with it. I've always like realized it's like okay, this isn't how real people act, right?
But it's never been that bad of an issue until I read this, and it's actually like annoying how bad it is because every female you see is the exact same, and they're all like the most beautiful people you've ever seen. It's like every person, every woman he comes across is he describes like the author describes them as like super beautiful, like all the other players are stunned to even see them. That's definitely one of my biggest negative points. Um, all right, so moving on, we have enemy players are all the same. So this is kind of builds off the last one, but this is for like the enemy like males usually because all the women are the same, despite if they're like friendlies or enemies. But then the enemy like males are all like super arrogant. So anyone who's not gonna like join him or be an ally with the main character just immediately is like really like a huge jerk to the main character and is like thinks he's so much better than everyone around him and he's like super like narcissistic and thinks he's the best and there's like no way the main character could beat me, like that type of thing. And, all right, so moving on, we have everyone underestimates the main character. So this builds into the last point, and it is kind of annoying. Everyone who fights him is always like, there's no way he could be as strong as people say. It's not possible. Despite every single person who comes in contact with him getting destroyed, right? So it is really annoying that that keeps happening. The main character gets way too lucky. Pretty much every item he needs, he just happens to get from luck, even if it's like super rare and they can only get it like way later in the game. He'll just somehow stumble upon it earlier. I wish it was more of him trading for the things he needed, so then it would make like a bit more sense. But he just happens to find every single good thing he could get, right? So the next one is overused writing terms. So there's terms that the author uses throughout the writing that he just keeps using over and over. So like he'll say like moreover this happens, moreover that happens. I think one time I was reading and he literally said moreover 3 times in the same paragraph. So I was like, that's kind of annoying. There's other examples of this too. Like rare as a phoenix feather. Every single item that like the main character gets lucky on and gets, he'll describe the item as rare as a phoenix feather. All right, so that's it for the cons list. Back to you, Butter. Thank you, Butter. All right, quick intermission to say if you're enjoying the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. There's a lot more anime manga content on the way. I promise you'll love it. All right, back to the video. One thing I want to mention, especially after the pros and cons list, is that as I've read, I've noticed the author keeps doing a better job of writing, and a lot of the cons aren't as bad as the series continues. For example, the side characters have been getting more development, and especially some of the female characters are getting a bit better. Not insanely better, but definitely better than they were. Okay, so now I'm going to rate the series using my patented rating system. This is a 0 to 10 scale, but we break that down into sections. So I will rate character/character development, world building, and overall plot/writing all on a scale of 0 to 2 points. So they can either get 0 points of terrible, 1 point of mid, and 2 points of good. And lastly, I'll rate how enjoyable it is to read on a scale of 0 to 4, because enjoyment is absolutely the most important aspect of a series. First up is characters/character development. I just don't think I can give a series a point for character development. Almost every female character is the same. Almost every non-friendly male is the same. However, like I just said, it's getting a lot better. Some of the non-friendly characters are more interesting, and the friendly side characters are pretty decent. As for the main character, he's really just mid. He doesn't really have any quirks that make him interesting, but I do like how he's clever and he has a grand plan to achieve his goals. So I can't give a 1 for this section, but I also can't give it a 0. So I'm going to give it a 0.5. Next is world building. I kind of pooed on the world building in the intro, but it's actually pretty good. You get a good idea of how everything works and how the world is progressing as well. As good as it is, though, it's nowhere near the level of something like One Piece or really any mainstream anime, so I'm going to give it a 1. Now for the plot/writing. It's got a decently interesting plot. Somewhat basic, but what really saves the plot is how the author writes. The author is able to give me a good idea of how the story is progressing and where it's going. I do wish more unexpected things would happen, but at the same time, I also can't say I've expected every single thing that's happened. There is this overarching storyline for the whole God's Domain that with where I'm at, it feels like it's barely starting. I won't spoil anything, but there's some mysteries at foot, and it's definitely something I find interesting. My rating for this category is teetering between 0.5 and 1, but with how I've seen the author improve his writing and story making skills from the start of the series, I have high hopes, so I'm going to give this a 1. Now for the last and most important category, how enjoyable it is to read the story. From beginning to where I am now, I've loved almost every second of reading. One thing the author does an amazing job of is introducing new things throughout the story, so there's always a new aspect of the game that's important. It's not just introducing every single thing at the beginning of the series and going from there. The author also uses the main character's knowledge of the future of the game to tease things and get you excited for what's to come. From a critical perspective, the main character probably gets cool new items and interesting quests way too often, but this aspect of the writing means you get to see the main character get cool things often, which in turn makes it more interesting to read.
Add in all the badass moments with the main character, and the story becomes one of the most fun series I've read. So in terms of enjoyability, I'm giving the series a 4.5 out of 5. So add all the numbers together. Let me get my calculator. And that equals a total rating of 7 out of 10. I'd recommend this series to anyone looking for an enjoyable series to turn their brain off to. If you're looking for an amazing story with insane plot twists and you never know what's going to happen next, you're going to want to find something else. But I can almost guarantee the time you spend reading Reincarnation of the Strongest Sword God will be enjoyable. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Stay slippery. Butter out.